23 years, Abigail Turner believed she was unwanted. She grew up in foster homes while searching for a family that never seemed to exist. Then Victor Langston died. His children inherited millions. His grandchildren inherited luxury homes. And Abigail, she inherited a rusty old key. The family laughed. But hidden behind that key was a family secret that had been buried for more than 20 years, and a hidden inheritance that would change Abigail's life forever. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories. Abigail Turner had never been anyone's first choice. Not when she was left on the steps of a county shelter as a baby, not when she spent her childhood moving from one foster home to another, carrying her entire life in a suitcase that never seemed to get any lighter. And certainly not when the Langston family gathered in their marble-lined estate to hear the reading of Victor Langston's will. At 23 years old, Abigail sat quietly in the back of the room while lawyers handed out fortunes. The eldest son received a thriving investment company. The daughter inherited a lakefront mansion worth millions. Grandchildren walked away with trust funds, luxury properties, and enough money to secure generations of comfort. Then came Abigail's turn. The room fell silent. The attorney opened a small wooden box and placed it in her hands. Inside was a single rusty key, nothing more. A few people exchanged amused glances. Someone laughed. Another whispered, "Looks like he finally remembered she wasn't really family." Abigail forced a smile, but the words cut deeper than they knew. For most of her life, she had wondered what it felt like to belong somewhere, to have a place where people waited for her, a place where her name meant something. But orphan girls don't spend much time dreaming about inheritance. They're usually too busy trying to survive. As she stared at the old key resting in her palm, Abigail couldn't help but think that maybe the Langstons were right. Maybe Victor Langston had simply forgotten her. Maybe the key opened an old storage unit, or a dusty shed nobody wanted, or perhaps it opened nothing at all. The laughter around the room grew louder. Nobody offered congratulations. Nobody asked how she felt. The meeting moved on as if her life-changing moment had already ended. But it hadn't, because Victor Langston had spent years building an empire, and men like him rarely did anything by accident. Abigail didn't know it yet, but the rusty key in her hand wasn't the smallest inheritance in the room. It was the largest, because Victor hadn't left her money. He had left her a mystery. And before the year was over, that mystery would lead Abigail Turner to a forgotten estate, a buried family secret, and a truth powerful enough to change everything she thought she knew about herself. The others left the room believing they had won. Abigail walked away with a key. But sometimes the smallest gifts open the biggest doors. The first thing Abigail Turner did after the reading of Victor Langston's will was exactly what everyone expected. Nothing. For 3 days. The small wooden box sat untouched on the kitchen counter of her tiny apartment. Every time she walked past it, she felt a strange mix of curiosity and disappointment. The apartment itself was barely large enough for one person, a second-floor rental above a laundromat on the edge of Billings, Montana. The pipes rattled at night. The refrigerator hummed louder than it should, and when winter winds pushed against the old windows, the entire place seemed to shiver. Still, it was hers, which was more than Abigail had for most of her childhood. After aging out of foster care at 18, she'd worked every job she could find: waitress, cashier, dog walker, hotel cleaner. Nothing glamorous, nothing permanent, but enough to survive. And survival was something Abigail knew well. On the 4th morning, while drinking coffee before her shift at the diner, she finally opened the box again. The rusty key looked even older in daylight. Heavy brass, handmade. Its bow carried an unusual symbol engraved into the metal. A raven, its wings spread wide. Abigail frowned. She was certain she had seen the symbol before, somewhere. Then she remembered. Victor Langston's study, years ago, during one of the rare family gatherings where she had been invited more out of obligation than affection. She had wandered into his private office. There had been a painting above his desk, a black raven perched on a stone gate. The same symbol, exactly the same. A chill crept down her spine. She immediately dug through the few belongings she had kept from her years with the Langstons. Old photographs, Christmas cards, birthday letters, most of them formal and distant. Then she found it. A faded photograph taken nearly 10 years earlier. Victor Langston stood beside a wrought iron gate. Behind him sat a massive estate surrounded by pine trees and mountains. In the corner of the gate was the raven symbol. Abigail stared at the image. Her pulse quickened. On the back of the photograph, written in Victor's unmistakable handwriting, were 4 words. Blackthorn Manor, summer 2014. "What are you hiding?" she whispered. That afternoon, she drove to the county records office. The elderly clerk behind the desk spent nearly 20 minutes searching through archived property files before finally finding a match. "Blackthorn Manor," he said. His eyebrows lifted. "Haven't heard that name in years." Abigail leaned forward. "What is it?" The man adjusted his glasses. "Old Langston property." Her heart skipped. "It belonged to Victor." The clerk nodded. "Still does, technically, remote place, deep in the mountains. Nobody's lived there in decades." "Why not?" The man hesitated. "Stories." "What kind of stories?" He chuckled softly. "The kind old towns always tell." Abigail waited. "They say Victor's father built it back in the 1940s, some kind of private retreat." The clerk lowered his voice. "Then one winter, the entire staff disappeared." Abigail blinked. "Disappeared? That's the story." The man shrugged. "Most folks think it's nonsense. But after that, nobody stayed there very long. Outside, the sky had begun to darken. Snow clouds rolled over the distant mountains. Yet, instead of feeling afraid, Abigail felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. For the first time since Victor's funeral, she had a direction. The following morning, she packed a duffel bag, filled her truck with gas, and began the 4-hour drive north. The farther she traveled, the emptier the roads became. Small towns gave way to forests. Forests gave way to mountains. By late afternoon, she reached the final stretch of road shown on an old survey map. The pavement ended. A narrow dirt path climbed into the hills. Branches scraped against her truck as she drove. The forest grew thicker, darker, almost untouched. Then she saw it. The gate, massive black iron, covered in rust, and in its center, a raven with outstretched wings. Exactly like the symbol on the key. Abigail stepped from the truck. Cold mountain air filled her lungs. For a moment she simply stood there. The place felt forgotten, like the world had moved on and left it behind. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the key. Her fingers trembled. Not from fear, from anticipation. Slowly, she inserted it into the ancient lock. Nothing happened. Then she turned it. A loud metallic click echoed through the forest. The gate swung inward. By itself, Abigail froze. Beyond the gate stretched a long stone driveway winding through towering pines. At the end stood the silhouette of a mansion. Huge, silent, watching. Blackthorn Manor. The place Victor Langston had hidden from everyone. The place he had chosen to leave to her. As she drove forward, snowflakes began drifting from the sky. The estate grew larger with every passing second. Broken windows reflected the fading light. Stone chimneys rose above the trees. And despite decades of neglect, The manor still carried an undeniable sense of grandeur. It wasn't a storage shed. It wasn't an empty lot. And it certainly wasn't worthless. Victor Langston had left her something far more important than money. A secret. But as Abigail parked in front of the towering entrance, she noticed something that made her stomach tighten. Fresh tire tracks, leading up to the house. And they weren't hers. Someone else had been here. Recently. Very recently. Suddenly, the silence of the mountains didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like a warning. And somewhere inside Blackthorn Manor, hidden behind decades of dust and secrets, something was waiting for her. Something Victor Langston had spent a lifetime protecting. And Abigail was about to discover why. The first night inside Blackthorn Manor was colder than Abigail expected. The mansion had electricity in only a few rooms. Most of the wiring was decades old, and the lights flickered whenever the wind pushed against the mountainside. She built a fire in the massive stone fireplace of what had once been the grand library. The flames crackled softly. Outside, snow drifted across the grounds. Inside, the shadows seemed to move with every flicker of light. Abigail sat wrapped in an old blanket she had found in her truck. The key rested on the table beside her. For hours, she studied the room. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Portraits lined the walls. Most were covered with dust. One portrait, however, caught her attention. Victor Langston, much younger, perhaps in his 40s. He stood beside a woman Abigail had never seen before. The woman was smiling. Victor was not. His hand rested protectively on the shoulder of a little girl. Abigail stepped closer. Something about the child felt familiar. The eyes, the shape of the face, the small dimple in her left cheek. Abigail's stomach tightened. The little girl looked exactly like the child she saw every morning in old foster care photographs of herself. No, she whispered. It couldn't be. Could it? Before she could study the painting further, a loud bang echoed somewhere upstairs. Abigail spun around. Silence followed. Her pulse hammered. For several seconds she listened. Nothing. Just the wind. Or so she told herself. Grabbing a flashlight, she slowly climbed the staircase. The wooden steps groaned beneath her feet. Dust floated through the beam of light. At the end of the second-floor hallway stood a single door, half open, moving slightly, as though someone had recently passed through it. Abigail pushed it open. The room beyond appeared untouched. A bedroom, old furniture, a dresser, a writing desk, and on the desk sat a leather journal, not covered in dust. Her heart skipped. Everything else in the room looked abandoned. The journal didn't. She approached carefully. When she opened it, her breath caught. The first page was dated 24 years earlier. The handwriting was elegant and feminine. She began reading. Victor says I should leave before they find out. Abigail frowned. She turned the page. He believes the board will destroy everything if they learn the truth. Another page. I promised I would protect her. Her hands trembled. She flipped farther ahead. Then she saw a name. A single name written over and over throughout the journal. Abigail. The room seemed to tilt. She stared, blinking, certain she had imagined it. But there it was again, and again, and again. Abigail, Abigail, Abigail. The flashlight nearly slipped from her hand. She turned to the final entry. The date was 23 years ago, just weeks after she had been born. The words were shaky, hurried, almost desperate. If anything happens to me, Victor must keep his promise. She can never know until she's ready. One day she will come home. Abigail's chest tightened. Home. The word hit harder than it should have, because she had never had one. Not really. Suddenly she heard another sound. A car engine. Outside. She rushed to the window. Headlights moved through the trees below. A black SUV. The vehicle stopped near the gate. Someone stepped out. A man. Tall. Wearing a dark coat. He stood there staring directly at the house. At her, Abigail immediately ducked. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it. Who was he? How did he know she was here? The SUV remained parked for several minutes, then finally turned around and disappeared into the darkness. But Abigail didn't sleep after that. At dawn, she returned to the library. The portrait still bothered her. The woman, the little girl, the resemblance. There had to be answers somewhere. She spent the entire morning searching through cabinets and drawers. Most contained nothing but old records and estate paperwork. Then, hidden inside a locked compartment beneath the Victor's desk, she discovered a small metal box. And strangely enough, the rusty key opened it perfectly. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, carefully preserved. As Abigail flipped through them, tears slowly filled her eyes. Every photograph featured the same little girl from the portrait. Birthday parties, school events, Christmas mornings, family vacations, years of memories, years of love, the kind of memories Abigail had never experienced. Then she noticed something strange. In every photo, Victor Langston appeared nearby, watching, protecting, smiling, like a grandfather. At the bottom of the box lay a sealed envelope. Across the front, written in Victor's unmistakable handwriting, were 5 words. For Abigail. When she returns. Abigail's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a letter. The paper had yellowed with age. She unfolded it carefully. The first sentence stole the air from her lungs. If you are reading this, then I have failed to tell you the truth while I was alive. Her eyes raced across the page. I was never your adoptive father. Abigail stopped breathing. The room fell silent. Everything around her seemed to disappear. She forced herself to continue. Abigail, I am your grandfather. A tear slipped down her cheek. Then another. Then another. For 23 years, she had believed she had been abandoned, forgotten, unwanted. But the letter told a different story. Her mother had not abandoned her. She had died. A car accident. Just months after giving birth. And Victor, terrified that powerful people within his business empire would use Abigail as leverage in an ongoing family battle over inheritance and control, had hidden her identity. He had placed her within the foster care system under strict legal protection. Only a handful of people had ever known the truth. Abigail lowered the letter. Her hands were trembling uncontrollably. Everything she believed about herself had just changed. She wasn't the unwanted orphan girl she thought she was. She wasn't an outsider who had somehow wandered into the Langston family. She belonged there. She always had. Then she noticed something else inside the envelope. A second piece of paper. Smaller, folded several times. A map, and at the bottom, a handwritten message. They never stopped looking for it. And now they'll come looking for you. At that exact moment, a loud crash echoed somewhere downstairs. Not the wind, not the house settling. Something had broken. And for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Manor, Abigail realized she wasn't alone in the mansion anymore. The crash downstairs echoed through Blackthorn Manor like a gunshot. Abigail froze. For a split second, every instinct told her to run, to grab her truck keys, to leave the mansion, to drive until the mountains disappeared behind her. After all, running was something she had done her entire life. When foster families gave up on her, when schools changed, when people left, when life became too painful, she ran because staying always seemed to hurt more. But something was different now. The letter from Victor still trembled in her hands. "I am your grandfather." Those 4 words refused to leave her mind. For 23 years, Abigail had carried a wound she couldn't name, a silent ache, the belief that somewhere, somehow, she hadn't been enough for someone to keep, not enough to be chosen, not enough to be loved, not enough to stay. And now, in a single morning, that belief had begun to crack, slowly, painfully, like ice breaking at the end of a long winter. Another sound came from downstairs, a door closing. Abigail swallowed hard. Then something unexpected happened. She wasn't afraid, not completely, because for the first time in her life, she felt she was standing on something solid. Truth, the kind that changes a person, the kind that gives them roots. She carefully folded Victor's letter and placed it inside her jacket. Then she picked up the flashlight and walked toward the staircase, step by step, not because she was brave, but because she was tired of being afraid. The grand foyer below was empty. The front door swayed slightly in the cold wind. One of the glass panels had shattered. Snow drifted across the marble floor. Whoever had entered was already gone, or hiding. Abigail searched every room on the first floor. Nothing. No footprints. No voices. No sign of another person. Eventually, she locked the door and returned to the library. But she couldn't focus on the break-in. Not anymore. Her thoughts kept returning to the letter. To her mother. To Victor. To everything she never knew. That evening, she opened the metal box again. This time she studied every photograph, every face, every detail. For hours. The little girl smiling in those pictures wasn't just someone who looked like her. It was her. There was no doubt now. And what struck Abigail most wasn't the wealth, or the beautiful houses, or the expensive vacations. It was the way people looked at her in those photographs, the way Victor smiled, the way her mother held her, the way they touched her shoulder, held her hand, wrapped their arms around her. Small things, ordinary things, the kinds of things most people never think about. But to Abigail, they felt extraordinary, because she had spent her entire life imagining she had never been loved. And now she was staring at proof that she had been. Tears blurred her vision. For years she had blamed herself. Maybe she wasn't smart enough, pretty enough, easy enough to love. Maybe there was something broken inside her that everyone else could see. But now she realized something heartbreaking. The little girl in those photographs had never been unwanted. She had simply been lost. The difference changed everything. Outside, darkness settled over the mountains. Inside the manor, the fire burned low. Abigail sat alone in the library and thought about every version of herself she had been. The frightened child carrying a donated backpack. The teenager watching other foster kids get adopted. The young woman pretending she didn't care when nobody came to visit on holidays. All those years she had built walls around her heart. Not because she wanted to, because she believed she had to. If nobody loved you, eventually you stopped expecting them to. It hurt less that way, or at least that's what she told herself. Now she wasn't so sure. Near midnight, she opened another drawer in Victor's desk. Inside, she found dozens of letters, all addressed to her. Every one of them, birthdays, Christmases, graduations, years and years of letters. Letters that had never been sent. Her hands trembled as she opened the first. It was written on her 8th birthday. I saw your school picture today. You have your mother's smile. Another, age 12. You won a spelling competition. I am proud of you. Even if I cannot tell you myself. Another, age 16. I know these are difficult years. One day you will understand why I had to stay away. Abigail couldn't stop crying. Victor had known. Every year. Every birthday, every milestone, he had watched from a distance, protecting her in the only way he believed he could, and suddenly she understood something else. Victor hadn't left her Blackthorn Manor because he felt guilty. He hadn't left her the key because nobody else wanted it. He left it because he trusted her, more than anyone. The realization settled deep inside her chest. For the first time since arriving, she looked around the manor differently. The peeling wallpaper, the dusty chandeliers, the empty halls. She no longer saw a forgotten estate. She saw a message, a final act of faith. Victor believed she could restore what had been broken. Not just the house, herself. The next morning, Abigail woke before sunrise. The mountains outside glowed beneath fresh snow. Everything felt different. Not easier, not simpler, but clearer. The questions that had haunted her for years no longer carried the same weight. Who am I? Why was I abandoned? Why wasn't I enough? She finally had answers. And with those answers came something unfamiliar. Peace. Not complete peace? Not yet. There were still secrets hidden inside Blackthorn Manor. Still people who seemed interested in whatever Victor had left behind. Still the mysterious map folded inside the envelope. Still the warning. They never stopped looking for it. But for the first time in her life, Abigail wasn't searching for a family. She had found one. And somehow, that changed the way she saw everything else. She walked to the library window and looked out across the estate. The frozen lake, the towering pines, the winding driveway disappearing into the mountains. This place wasn't a burden. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't charity. It was home, and as the morning sun broke through the clouds, Abigail Turner made a decision. She wasn't leaving. No matter who came looking, no matter what secrets waited beneath Blackthorn Manor, no matter how dangerous the truth became, because for the first time in 23 years, she finally had something worth staying for. The morning after Abigail made her decision to stay, Blackthorn Manor felt different. Not because the dust had disappeared, not because the cracked windows had somehow repaired themselves overnight. The place was still old, still wounded, still carrying decades of silence within its walls. But for the first time since arriving, Abigail no longer felt like a visitor. She felt like she belonged there. The feeling surprised her. For most of her life, belonging had always seemed like something reserved for other people. Families belonged. Communities belonged. People with roots belonged. Not foster kids. Not girls who carried their lives from one temporary bedroom to another. Yet, standing in the grand foyer that morning, watching sunlight spill across the marble floor, Abigail realized something. Maybe home wasn't where you came from. Maybe it was where you decided to stay. She spent the next several days exploring every corner of Blackthorn Manor. There were dozens of rooms, some untouched for years, others frozen in time. She found antique furniture hidden beneath white sheets, boxes of photographs, old paintings, financial records dating back generations. And everywhere she looked, she found traces of Victor, his handwriting, his notes, his careful planning. It was almost as if he had expected her arrival, as if he had spent years preparing for it. Then, on the 5th day, Abigail discovered something that changed everything. Behind a loose panel inside the library fireplace was a small iron lockbox. Inside she found legal documents, property deeds, trust agreements, bank records, and one sealed envelope, addressed directly to her. Her heart pounded as she opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter from Victor. The paper was old, the ink slightly faded, but his words were unmistakable. "If you've found this, then you've begun to understand why I brought you here." Abigail sat down slowly. The fire crackled beside her. Snow drifted beyond the windows. and she began to read. Victor explained that Blackthorn Manor had never been the true inheritance. It was merely the doorway, the beginning. For decades, Victor had quietly invested a portion of the Langston fortune into a private trust. Not for his children, not for the board members who constantly fought over money and control. For Abigail, the trust had been hidden, protected, waiting. At the bottom of the letter was the name of a law firm in Denver, and a single sentence: "Use this wisely. Build something better than what we were." Abigail stared at the page. For several minutes she couldn't move. The next morning she drove to Denver. The journey took nearly 6 hours. The entire way she expected disappointment, a mistake, a misunderstanding, something. Life had taught her not to expect miracles. But when she arrived at the law office, the truth was even more shocking. The trust was real, very real. The amount left her speechless. Enough money to ensure she would never struggle again. Enough money to buy houses, businesses, a completely different life. The attorney finished speaking and folded his hands. "Mr. Langston believed you would know what to do with it." Abigail sat quietly. For years, she had imagined what she would do if she suddenly became wealthy. Travel, buy a home, never worry about bills again, maybe finally feel secure. But something unexpected happened as she sat there. None of those things felt important, because during her drive back to Montana, she couldn't stop thinking about something else. The foster homes, the shelters, the girls she had grown up with. The ones who disappeared after turning 18, the ones who had nowhere to go, the ones who never got a second chance, girls like her. That night she walked through Blackthorn Manor again, room by room. The east wing alone contained 12 bedrooms, most empty, most forgotten. She stopped in one doorway and looked around. Dust floated through moonlight. The room was beautiful, even abandoned. And suddenly she saw it. Not what the manor had been, what it could become. For the first time, she understood Victor's final message. Build something better than what we were, not richer. Better. The next morning, she began making phone calls. Contractors, architects, electricians, plumbers. By the end of the week, workers had arrived. The quiet estate came alive. Hammers echoed through hallways. Trucks moved along the driveway. Broken windows were replaced. Leaking roofs repaired. Walls painted. Floors restored. People in nearby towns began talking. The mysterious orphan girl who inherited Blackthorn Manor wasn't selling it. She was rebuilding it. No one understood why. Not at first. Then Abigail announced her plan. She would turn Blackthorn Manor into a residential transition center for young women aging out of foster care. A place where they could live, study, work, heal, and start over. The reactions were mixed. Some people praised her. Others called her naive. One businessman openly laughed. "You'll lose a fortune trying to save people who don't want to be saved." Abigail simply smiled. Because she remembered being 18. She remembered sleeping in her truck. Remembered eating crackers for dinner. Remembered pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Those girls didn't need saving. They needed opportunity. 3 months later, the first resident arrived. A 19-year-old named Lily. Quiet, nervous, carrying everything she owned inside 2 garbage bags. The sight nearly broke Abigail's heart, because she remembered carrying her belongings exactly the same way. Lily stood in the doorway, staring at the restored manor. "You mean I can stay here?" Abigail nodded. "As long as you need." The young woman looked confused. "Why would you do this for me?" Abigail glanced around the estate, at the restored walls, the warm lights, the home she had never expected to find. Then she smiled softly. "Because somebody gave me a key when I needed one." Lily didn't fully understand. Not yet. But Abigail did. Victor Langston hadn't left her millions. He had left her purpose. And purpose was worth far more than money. That night, as lights glowed from rooms that had stood empty for decades, Abigail sat alone on the manor's front porch. The mountains stretched endlessly beneath the stars. The air was cold, peaceful. For the first time in her life, she wasn't wondering where she belonged. She already knew, and somewhere deep inside Blackthorn Manor, hidden behind walls that still held untold secrets, Abigail felt something she hadn't felt since childhood. Hope, not just for herself, for everyone who would walk through those doors after her. Abigail Turner never expected Blackthorn Manor to change her. At first, she thought she was the one rescuing the house. But somewhere between the repairs, the late-night conversations, and the steady stream of young women arriving at the estate with nowhere else to go, she began to realize the truth. The house was rescuing her so, too. 6 months after opening the doors, Blackthorn Manor was no longer quiet. Laughter echoed through hallways that had once stood empty. The library hosted tutoring sessions 3 nights a week. The old dining room was filled with long tables where residents shared meals together. For the first time in decades, lights glowed from nearly every window. And for the first time in her life, Abigail wasn't waking up wondering how she would survive the next day. She was waking up with purpose. But growth has a way of attracting attention, especially when someone doesn't want you to succeed. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Abigail returned from town to find a black sedan parked outside the manor. A man in an expensive suit stood on the front steps. She recognized him immediately. Marcus Langston, Victor Langston's eldest son, the same man who inherited the investment company, the same man who barely acknowledged her existence at the reading of the will. He looked around the property with visible disapproval. The renovated gardens, the repaired windows, the women laughing on the porch. None of it seemed to impress him. "Quite the operation you've built," he said. His smile never reached his eyes. Abigail crossed her arms. "What do you want?" Marcus glanced toward the manor. "I came to make you an offer." She already knew she wouldn't like it. "Blackthorn Manor is sitting on valuable land," he continued. "Developers are interested. I'm not selling." His smile tightened. "You haven't heard the number yet." "I don't need to." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Marcus lowered his voice. "My father made a mistake." Abigail felt something cold settle in her chest. "There it is. The sentimental decision of an old man," Marcus said. "Nothing more." Abigail looked directly at him. "No." The single word hit harder than an argument ever could. Marcus stared. For the first time, he seemed genuinely annoyed. "You have no idea what you're protecting." "Maybe not, but I know why I'm protecting it." The conversation ended shortly after. Marcus left without shaking her hand, without saying goodbye, but before driving away, he looked back at the manor one final time. And something about that look unsettled her. It wasn't frustration. It was fear. That night, Abigail couldn't stop thinking about it. Marcus knew something. Something he wasn't saying. 3 days later, she discovered what it was. The discovery happened by accident. One of the contractors was repairing water damage in the basement when his hammer broke through an old section of stone wall. Behind it was a hidden chamber. The workers immediately called Abigail. By the time she arrived, everyone stood silently staring inside. The room was small, dry, completely sealed, as if someone had deliberately hidden it. Her pulse quickened. The chamber contained shelves lined with old boxes, documents, photographs, and one large steel lockbox. The same raven symbol appeared on its lid. Abigail's key opened it. Inside were dozens of files, Most contained business records dating back 40 years. At first glance, they seemed ordinary. Then she began reading, and her blood ran cold. The documents detailed illegal land acquisitions, fraud, bribery, political corruption, names, dates, signatures, evidence. Enough evidence to destroy powerful people, including several who were still alive, including Marcus Langston. Abigail sat down slowly. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Now she understood. Blackthorn Manor wasn't simply a family estate. It was a vault. Victor hadn't just hidden money, he had hidden the truth, and that truth had been waiting decades for someone brave enough to uncover it. That evening, she locked the files inside her office. Only 3 people knew they existed: Abigail, her attorney, and a retired judge who volunteered at the manor. She planned to decide what to do next. But someone else moved first. 2 nights later, Blackthorn Manor lost power. The entire estate plunged into darkness. At first, everyone assumed it was a storm. Then came the sound. Glass shattering, a scream from downstairs. Abigail grabbed a flashlight and ran. Residents emerged from their rooms, confused, terrified. When she reached the first floor, she found a brick lying in the center of the lobby. Attached was a note, only 6 words. "Stop digging. Last warning." Silence filled the room. No one spoke. Several of the younger women looked frightened. One began crying. And in that moment, Abigail faced a choice. The old Abigail would have panicked. The girl from foster care. The girl who spent years believing she had no power. But that girl wasn't standing there anymore. She looked around the room, at the women who depended on her, at the frightened faces waiting for someone to lead, waiting for someone to tell them they were safe. Abigail straightened her shoulders. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not because she wasn't scared, because she was terrified. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding something else matters more. She picked up the note, folded it calmly, then looked at everyone gathered in the lobby. "It's okay," she said. "We're not going anywhere." The words settled over the room like a blanket, and something remarkable happened. The fear began to fade, because courage can be contagious. Later that night, after everyone returned to bed, Abigail sat alone in Victor's library. The threatening note rested beside the hidden files. The fire crackled softly. Snow drifted beyond the windows. For a long time she stared at Victor's portrait above the fireplace. Then she noticed something she had never seen before, behind the painted frame. A small brass latch. Her heart skipped. Slowly, she climbed onto a chair and touched it. The frame swung outward. Behind it was another hidden compartment. Inside rested a single envelope, and on the front, written in Victor Langston's handwriting, were 7 words that changed everything. "If they've found this, trust nobody." Abigail's breath caught, because suddenly she realized something. The secret hidden beneath Blackthorn Manor was far bigger than money, far bigger than inheritance, and whoever was threatening her might already be closer than she thought. The envelope sat on Victor Langston's desk long after midnight. Abigail stared at it while the fire burned low in the library fireplace. Outside, snow drifted across the mountains. Inside, the old manor seemed to hold its breath. "If they found this, trust nobody." The words echoed in her mind. For months, she had believed the greatest challenge would be rebuilding Blackthorn Manor. She had been wrong. The house was easy. People were complicated. Secrets were dangerous. And truth. Truth always demanded a price. Slowly, she opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter. Victor's final letter. The handwriting was shakier than the others, as if it had been written near the end of his life. Abigail began reading. If you are holding this letter, then the people I feared have finally realized what remains hidden here." Her stomach tightened. "You must understand something, Abigail. The greatest mistake of my life was believing wealth could protect the people I loved." She continued reading. "Money built walls, power built enemies, but neither could save your mother." A tear slipped down her cheek. Victor had spent decades carrying that guilt. She could feel it in every sentence. "When your mother died, I lost more than a daughter. I lost my courage." The words struck her deeply, because for the first time, she wasn't reading about a wealthy businessman. She was reading about a broken father, a grieving grandfather, a man who had spent years trying to make peace with his failures. The final paragraph made her stop breathing. "Everything hidden within Blackthorn Manor belongs to the past. Do not spend your life protecting old secrets. Spend it building something better. That is the only inheritance that matters." Abigail lowered the letter. For a long time, she simply sat there. The threats, the hidden files, the corruption, the fortune. None of it suddenly felt as important as it had before, because Victor had finally given her the answer she'd been searching for. The treasure wasn't buried beneath the manor. The treasure was already living inside it. The women, the second chances, the future. The next morning, Abigail made a decision that shocked everyone, including her attorney, including the retired judge, including the people who wanted the files hidden forever. She turned everything over to federal investigators. Every document, every photograph, every record, every secret. She didn't negotiate. She didn't bargain. She didn't ask for protection. She simply told the truth. The storm that followed lasted months. Newspapers ran stories for weeks. Executives resigned. Politicians faced investigations. Several powerful people lost everything, including Marcus Langston. When reporters asked Abigail whether she regretted exposing her own family's history, she gave a simple answer. "No." Then she added, "The truth doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the people it affects." The interview spread across the country, and something unexpected happened. Letters began arriving at Blackthorn Manor. Hundreds of them, then thousands. Former foster children, single mothers, grandparents raising grandchildren, people who had survived abuse, loss, addiction, loneliness. Many shared the same message. "Your story gave me hope." Abigail kept every letter. She stored them inside the library where Victor's secrets had once been hidden, because she believed those letters were worth more than any fortune. Years passed. Blackthorn Manor continued to grow. The 12 bedrooms became 20, then 30. Scholarship programs were created. Job training programs followed. Therapists volunteered their time. Local businesses partnered with the center. Young women arrived scared, broken, lost. Many left confident, educated, ready to build lives they never thought possible. One autumn afternoon, nearly 5 years after she first unlocked the gate, Abigail stood on the front lawn watching a graduation ceremony. Rows of folding chairs stretched across the grass. Families filled the seats. Children laughed beneath the trees. Music drifted through the mountain air. The sight felt almost unreal, because once upon a time, Abigail had believed she would spend her life alone. She had been the little girl nobody chose, the foster child who packed her belongings into garbage bags, the young woman sitting quietly in the back of a room while everyone else inherited fortunes. Now she stood surrounded by hundreds of people who considered Blackthorn Manor home. A small voice interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Abigail." She turned. A young girl stood beside her, maybe 10 years old, shy, nervous, the daughter of one of the women staying at the manor. The girl held something in her hand. Abigail smiled. "What is it?" The child opened her palm. Inside rested a small brass key attached to a ribbon. Abigail frowned. "What's this?" The girl smiled. "My mom says keys open doors." She hesitated, then added softly, "You opened ours." For a moment, Abigail couldn't speak. Her eyes filled with tears, because suddenly she understood something Victor had known all along. A key is never just a key. Sometimes it opens a gate. Sometimes it opens a house. Sometimes it opens a secret. And sometimes it opens a life. That evening, after the ceremony ended and the last guests went home, Abigail sat alone on the front porch of Blackthorn Manor. The mountains glowed beneath the setting sun. Golden light spilled across the valley, the same valley she had first driven through, believing she was unwanted, believing she was alone, believing she had inherited nothing. She smiled softly. How wrong she had been. Victor Langston hadn't left her a fortune. He had left her a purpose. He had left her a chance to become the person she needed when she was young. And in doing so, he had given her something far more valuable than money. A family, a home, a future. As darkness settled across the mountains, lights began appearing throughout Blackthorn Manor. Room after room, window after window, warm, welcoming, alive. The old estate no longer looked haunted by secrets. It looked filled with hope. And for the first time in her life, Abigail Turner didn't wonder where she belonged. She already knew. She was home. And this time, home wasn't going anywhere. Sometimes life doesn't give us what we want. It gives us what we need. For years, Abigail Turner believed she had been forgotten. An orphan girl with no family, no future, no place to belong. Then one rusty key changed everything. Not because it led to money, not because it unlocked a mansion, but because it helped her discover something far more valuable. She was never abandoned. She was being prepared. Prepared to become the person who would open doors for others. And maybe that's the lesson hidden inside all of our struggles. The pain you carry today may become the strength someone else needs tomorrow. The rejection you survived may become the reason you learn compassion. And the thing that feels like a loss right now may one day become your greatest blessing. Because sometimes the smallest key opens the biggest future. And sometimes the life you're searching for is waiting on the other side of the door you're afraid to open.